For a more complete immersion, I recommend using headphones. This story happened when I was in the 7th grade. At that time, I was saving up for a major purchase, my very first MP3 player. I had to set aside money gifted for birthdays, Christmas, and other holidays. And my parents gave me $5 every day for bus fare and lunch in the school cafeteria. I tried to save as much of it as I could. So, after school, I often walked home, and to avoid a long detour, I would cut about 20 minutes by taking a path through a ravine. At the bottom of it flowed a small, trash-filled stream, which we mockingly called the Crap Creek. There were a lot of creepy stories about this ravine, each of which was retold with special enthusiasm during recess or after school. Some said that back in the 1980s, gangs dumped bodies here, and a few kids even swore they had found human bones. Others claimed that a maniac once lived there, building a dugout and waiting for victims in the thick bushes. There was even a legend about escaped convicts hiding out for a week from the police. But the wildest, and therefore our favorite, story was about ancient pagans who supposedly sacrificed children in that place. Who else, if not kids? After all, the ravine stood right next to the school. We understood perfectly well that this story had been invented by the older kids just to scare us younger ones. Personally, I never saw anything frightening in the ravine. At night, it might have been a gloomy place, but I always went home during the day, and the scariest things I ever ran into were a mangy cat or a couple of stray dogs. Despite the strict warnings from teachers and parents, we often played there after school. In the winter, we rode sleds and flattened cardboard boxes straight down the snowy hill from the very edge of the ravine. You'd rush downward, the icy wind whistling in your ears, while your friends hooted and laughed from above. The trick was to brake before reaching the water. The stream was shallow, barely knee-deep, but falling into it meant soaking your pants. Once, I lost control, shot straight into the creek, and came home dripping wet. My mom gave me such a lecture and a sore behind that I remembered it for a week. In the summer, we would just hang out, lying on the trampled grass, squinting up at the bright sun. Sometimes, we argued endlessly about who was cooler, the Lakers or the Chicago Bulls, chewing on blades of grass, picking sour sorrel, and making faces as we tried not to spit it out too quickly. Often, we played tag or cops and robbers. Once I sat for almost an hour in a patch of stinging nettles during an ambush. That evening, my mom had to put aloe compresses on me while I cursed my bad luck and my friends. In early spring, when the snow had not yet fully melted, we always went down to the creek, pulling soda caps from our pockets and launching them like boats, pushing them with sticks and throwing clumps of dirt at them to speed them up. Sometimes we tossed sticks into the water to see whose would float farther. If you lost, you had to take a flick on the forehead or carry the winter's backpack all the way home. I couldn't have imagined back then that this ravine would someday stop being just a playground and would turn into something entirely different, something you would remember for the rest of your life and that would always bring back goosebumps. The end of May was approaching, and the air was already heavy with summer. Nobody wanted to think about school anymore. My head was filled only with the thought of upcoming vacation and staying outside as long as possible. That day, the second to last class was supposed to be biology, but it was suddenly canceled, leaving us an unexpected free hour. Mike and I were sitting in the cafeteria, lazily poking at half-cold mashed potatoes and meatloaf with our forks. "Hey, do you want me to tell you a secret?" he asked, leaning closer and lowering his voice as if someone might overhear. "What secret?" I answered casually, trying to show I wasn't too interested. "If you come with me, you'll see for yourself. It's not far, just in the ravine." He glanced around quickly, checking for teachers. "Well, fine, but let's be quick," I agreed, although my curiosity had already gotten the better of me. Mike jumped up first and motioned for me to follow. 5 minutes later, we were carefully descending the familiar path down to the creek. Soon we reached a deeper thicket. The ground, still damp from yesterday's rain, squelched beneath our sneakers. Mike stopped near a large tree that looked like an old bearded man, reached into a hollow, and pulled something out. "Look," he said solemnly, holding up a crumpled bag of chips. Something rustled inside. "Chips? That's your secret?" I chuckled in disappointment. "Nope, look inside." Mike tore the bag open and pulled out a bent pack of cigarettes. I whistled in surprise. Holy crap, where did you get those? My dad came home drunk yesterday. They fell out of his pocket. I grabbed them before he noticed. Mike carefully took out 2 cigarettes and handed one to me. Let's smoke. Are you crazy? I backed away. If my dad smells it, he'll kill me. Oh, I get it. You're too chicken, Mike smirked, striking a match. I'm not chicken, just I began, but he was already lighting up. Of course, my agreement was more an act of stubborn foolishness than genuine desire. I took the cigarette from Mike and awkwardly clamped it between my lips. I stared at the glowing tip for a few seconds, then took a deep breath. A cough immediately burst out of me. My eyes filled with tears. The smoke seared my throat and lungs. Mike was coughing too, bending over and desperately waving his arms. This is crap, he wheezed, struggling to catch his breath. Yeah, I don't get how adults can smoke this, I muttered, tossing the cigarette to the ground and stomping on it. Okay, let's go, or we'll be late for our next class. Mike shoved the cigarettes back into the chip bag, stuffed it into the hollow, and turned to leave the bushes. We were just about to step out when we suddenly noticed someone standing on the path. When we looked more closely, we saw a man. He stood with his back to us, dressed entirely in black. Pants, jacket, even his cap was dark, pulled low to his ears. He didn't move, as though he were waiting for something or listening to the stream. From where I crouched, I could only see his broad, slightly hunched shoulders and his tense hands clenched into fists. Who is that? Mike whispered, grabbing my sleeve. How should I know? I hissed back, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. He's not even moving. Weird guy. We crouched behind the bushes, trying to breathe silently. The path where he stood was the only gentle way up, back to school. The other sides of the ravine were steep slopes, impossible to climb now with the wet ground. A minute or two passed. The man remained motionless, occasionally glancing at his watch. He was definitely waiting for something. What are we gonna do? Mike muttered nervously. We're gonna be late for physics. My dad'll thrash me if he finds out. Wait, maybe he'll leave soon, I said, though my voice shook. The minutes dragged on. 5, 10, 15. Our legs ached from crouching, but the man still didn't move, only shifting from foot to foot, glancing at his watch again. He seemed like some kind of psycho. Suddenly, he bent down and picked up a long stick from the ground, with a sharp metal hook fixed at the end. Then he turned directly in our direction. My stomach dropped. I felt as if he could see right through the bushes and knew we were there. But instead, he turned back toward the riverbank. Slowly, like a fisherman trying not to scare his catch, he lowered the hook into the water and pulled something dark and shapeless from the stream. We craned our necks, trying to see. It looked like nothing more than a filthy rag. He dragged it closer, and a wet bundle emerged from the water. The man carefully laid the stick down, glanced around, then bent over his catch. Do you see what it is? Mike whispered, clutching my arm. No, it just looks like fabric. What's inside? I can't tell, I answered, straining on tiptoe. But the man leaned too low over the bundle, blocking our view. Then, suddenly, he straightened up and turned toward us. This time, the bushes no longer hid our outstretched necks and heads. He could see us. We instantly ducked, almost whimpering in fear. My heart pounded so hard it seemed to echo through the ravine. The only thought raced through my mind, if only he didn't notice us. But this man radiated something terrifying. It felt like we had seen something we weren't supposed to, something that could cost us dearly. He froze for a moment, as if listening, then began walking straight toward us with confident steps. He's coming, Mike gasped, clutching my hand. Quiet, I hissed back. Deeper into the bushes. Now, we crawled on all fours, trying not to make noise. The branches whipped at our faces and arms, while dry twigs cracked treacherously beneath our knees. I raised my hand sharply, signaling Mike to stop, but behind us, footsteps pressed closer. The man wasn't slowing down, if anything. He was speeding up, as though hunting us. He's on our tail, my friend whispered hoarsely, eyes wide with panic. Maybe we should jump across the river. Are you insane? I snapped. He'd spot us instantly. Just keep going, but stay quiet. We pushed deeper into the thicket. The bushes grew denser, their branches snagging at our clothes. The ravine no longer looked familiar, was as if I were crawling here for the first time. But the man's steady steps never faltered. He knew exactly where we were, closing in with terrifying certainty. Mike was going around in circles. "That's it, it's a dead end," he whispered, almost sobbing as he ran into a thick wall of bushes. "We're finished." I looked around desperately, searching for any escape, when my eyes caught something unusual. Hidden among tangled roots and dry leaves lay a strange metal hatch, completely rusted, locked with a huge padlock. "Look, a hatch," I whispered, tugging on the iron ring. But the lock held firm. Mike joined in, and together we yanked with all our strength. The lid didn't budge. "Forget it, it's useless," he hissed, close to tears. "What should we do now?" My thoughts raced, and suddenly an idea struck me. If we can find something thin and strong, like a hairpin, maybe we could pick the lock. I've seen them do it in movies. "We could," I began, but the words froze in my throat. Behind me came a low, rough voice, so close it sent ice down my spine. "What the hell are you kids doing here?" I froze. My heart plummeted, my breath locked tight in my chest. Mike reacted faster. He spun around and bolted through the bushes, toward the creek, snapping branches and leaving a clear trail. The man lunged after him, cursing and thrashing through the thicket. "Run," the voice in my head screamed. At last, my paralysis broke. I turned in the opposite direction, crashing through the bushes blindly. Thorny branches clawed my face and tore at my clothes, but I felt no pain fear, gripped my chest too tightly. Then I heard it, Mike's scream. High, piercing, filled with terror. The sound stabbed through the ravine, and I whipped my head around just as my foot snagged on a root. I crashed hard to the ground. Pain seared my hands. My knee scraped open, and I bit my lip until it bled. Dizzy, breath ragged, I forced myself up and stumbled forward, sobs tearing at my chest. The thought pulsed in my skull with every pounding step. He caught him, but I couldn't go back. Fear had swallowed me whole. Going back felt like running into death itself. Bursting out of the thicket at last, I stopped, gasping, trying to understand where I was. Branches cracked nearby. Instantly, I dropped low, pressing myself behind a thick tree trunk. My pulse thundered in my ears. I peeked out. On the slope above stood the man. His chest heaved as he breathed heavily, and then I saw his hands, red and wet. At first, I thought it was a trick of the fading light, but then I saw the knife glinting in his grip. His palms were smeared with blood. He froze, scanning the area. I flattened myself against the tree, afraid even to blink. Minutes crawled by before I dared to glance again. By then he was climbing the ravine, looking back over his shoulder as though worried someone had seen him. Soon he vanished into the trees. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain it echoed through the ravine. I rose cautiously, ready to sprint for home. But then more snapping branches, footsteps, heavy and deliberate. He was coming back. I threw myself into the undergrowth, burying my face in the dirt. The crunch of his boots drew nearer. Each step cracked branches and leaves like bones. I squeezed my eyes shut, scarcely breathing. He stopped right beside me, just feet away. I could hear his hoarse, uneven breathing. A cold shiver ran down my spine. "Where are you, you little bastard?" he muttered, dragging his feet through the leaves. This time he moved excruciatingly slowly, inspecting every bush, every shadow. I lay motionless, every muscle trembling, terrified that the smallest sound would betray me. Time stretched into eternity, 5 minutes, 30, I couldn't tell. Finally, the footsteps faded. He must have grown tired and headed back up the ravine, but I didn't move. I pressed myself deeper into the earth, certain it was a trick, that if I lifted my head, he'd pounce. Twilight thickened, the light dissolving into darkness. Still, I didn't stir. My arms and legs burned, my muscles screamed, yet I lay there, waiting. When full night finally swallowed the ravine, it wrapped me in a suffocating cocoon. Now, every rustle, every whisper of leaves sounded like his footsteps returning. I heard voices, distant, indistinct male voices, talking to each other. Yes, they were close, just a few steps away, but I didn't move. I curled myself into a ball, trying to breathe as quietly as possible. Time stretched endlessly. Minutes dragged into hours. I slipped into a restless half-sleep, then jolted awake at the slightest noise. The night felt endless. Several times I tried to stand up and go home, but the fear was too strong. I couldn't make myself move. At last, exhausted and weak, I drifted into a fitful doze. I dreamed in fragments. Mike's face, his scream, the blood on the man's hands, and that bundle he had pulled out of the river. I woke shivering from the cold. My body ached from lying on the ground all night. The sky had turned gray. Dawn was breaking. Slowly, cautiously, I stood, scanning the ravine. It was empty, silent. The man was gone. Only the morning wind rustled the leaves. Step by step, I climbed upward, barely recognizing familiar landmarks. My legs buckled beneath me. My mouth tasted of dirt and fear. My head was hollow. I couldn't think of anything except what had happened. Where was Mike now? What had that man in black done to him? I told my parents everything. At first, they listened in silence. Then my mom went to call the police, while my dad sat me at the kitchen table, gripping my shoulder, repeating quietly, "It's over now, son. You're safe. Do you hear me?" The police arrived quickly. Several cars, officers with dogs. They cordoned off the ravine with yellow tape, forbidding anyone to enter. Later, my father told me, in a weary, broken voice, that they had found the hatch Mike and I had seen. Inside was a strange underground space, like an old storage cellar. There were shelves, tables, empty crates, and bottles, but no man, no trace of him. Only one thing: Mike's body. I remember the crushing silence that followed as my father turned to the window, his face hidden from me. My heart collapsed inside my chest. Weeks later, coming home from school, I froze. At the entrance of our building stood Mike's parents, worn down, hollowed by grief. I mumbled a greeting, but they didn't answer. Mike's father looked me dead in the eyes. The hatred and pain there made me step back. His hands shook, clenched into fists. His wife gently touched his arm, whispering something to calm him, and led him away. I never saw them again. A week later, their apartment was empty. Movers in dirty overalls carried out what remained. Mike's parents had left. Since then, I never went near the ravine again. Even years later, when the fear dulled, I always chose the long way around or rode the bus. I couldn't bring myself to set foot on that path. I heard that, many years later, the ravine was filled with earth and a parking lot was built over it. But even now, as an adult, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, certain I can still hear Mike's desperate scream, then the heavy footsteps of the man in black.